What would you do if the whole world looked at you as if you were invisible, yet just one touch, one nod, could bring tears to someone's eyes? If it were you standing in a fine restaurant, dressed in a worn uniform, eyes lowered in hesitation, would you dare to speak, knowing the person before you couldn't hear you, when that person is the mother of a billionaire, wealthy, powerful, and living entirely in the quiet world of her own? That waitress wasn't a star, had no title, no shining, pastily trembling hands, and a heart marked by scars. But in the moment she lifted her hands, her language transcended all barriers of class and distance. And from that moment, her buried secret began to surface along with the question that lingers. Can someone who's lost everything begin again through one simple act of kindness? Stay until the end. This story might make you see yourself differently. If something in it touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so together we can keep telling stories that make people believe in humanity once more. Now, then let's begin. Maria Reyes placed the last napkin on the 6-meter-long dining table, covered with an ivory linen cloth, before adjusting the half-closed curtain. Outside, the first snow of the season drifted gently onto the gray stone roof of Cross Manor. The fading light of day filtered through the glass, casting a soft glow across her sun-tanned face. Maria stepped back and looked around the room one final time. Everything was ready. Maria, 35, was a Latina woman, small in stature but strong. Her dark brown skin and long black hair were usually tied neatly at the nape of her neck. Her face was unremarkable, but her eyes were gentle and calm, always hiding something deeper than words could tell. She had worked at Cross Manor for nearly 6 years, and to little Gabriel, she was the whole world. Gabriel Cross, 9 years old, thin, with messy light brown hair and large, deep eyes that seemed to hold unspoken questions. He rarely spoke, but he was remarkably intelligent, especially with technology. He didn't fit in with the world of expensive nannies or strict tutors. Only Maria made him feel safe. That afternoon, the air inside Cross Manor felt different. Maria sensed it from the moment she entered the kitchen that morning, the averted eyes, the awkward whispers among the staff, and the unusual absence of Mrs. Evelyn, the mother of the master of the house, Alexander Cross. Evelyn Cross was a woman in her 60s, tall and slender, with sharp, cold features. Every step she took seemed to judge those around her. She had lived in Europe for many years and had only returned to Cross Manor a few months ago. Since her arrival, Maria had felt constantly under scrutiny. Evelyn's gaze, when it fell on her, wasn't that of an employer looking at an employee, but of someone seeing a stain that needed to be erased. Alexander Cross, the tech billionaire and Gabriel's father, was the image of perfection, tall, silver-haired, often dressed in charcoal suits, quiet and courteous. But he was distant from his son and from his own home. Work pulled him away from real life. After his wife's death, Alexander had become even more detached, leaving Gabriel's care entirely to the house staff and, most of all, to Maria. Maria remembered the day Evelyn returned. At that first dinner, the older woman observed her every move, from the way she poured water to how she pulled out Gabriel's chair. Not long after, Evelyn began changing how things were arranged in the house, issuing indirect orders to Maria, even suggesting a new caretaker for Gabriel when Maria was off duty. But each time Maria left, Gabriel reacted violently. In the end, Evelyn backed off, but her eyes never stopped following Maria. Maria. Grandma says I have to wear a suit for dinner with the guests, Gabriel said that day, standing by the kitchen door with his old iPad in hand. Maria bent down to fix his collar. But you don't like that, do you? The boy shook his head. She's making Dad change too. He doesn't look me in the eye anymore. Maria froze. The boy's words tightened her chest. She placed a hand gently on his shoulder. People can change, but you don't have to. Just stay who you are. Okay. Gabriel nodded and walked away. But Maria could feel it. Something was coming. A storm. And her instincts proved right sooner than she expected. 3 days later, as Maria was folding linens in the laundry room, 2 men dressed in black appeared. They introduced themselves as internal security officers of Cross Manor and asked her to come with them. No explanation, no kindness in their eyes. They led her into the library, where Alexander, Evelyn, and a strange woman were waiting. On the table sat an open red velvet box. Inside was emptiness, the spot where the legendary Cross family necklace should have been. Evelyn rose, her voice steady. Like reading a verdict, my ancestral necklace has disappeared, and your fingerprints, Maria, were found in the family vault. Maria froze. She couldn't speak. Alexander looked at her, but his eyes avoided hers. The other woman, clearly a lawyer, handed over a document labeled Temporary Employment Suspension and Handover for Investigation. Evelyn ordered coldly, "Pack your things and leave the estate within 1 hour." Maria raised her head and asked calmly, "May I see the evidence?" "No need," Evelyn replied. "We have sufficient reason, within 30 minutes." Maria stood outside the gates in the falling snow, holding a small suitcase and a cloth bag with a few personal items. No one came to see her off. No one spoke a word. She only heard the automatic gates close behind her. Except a small voice called softly from beyond the fence, "Maria will bring you back, I promise." Gabriel stood there, his eyes glistening, still clutching his old iPad. Maria nodded gently and forced a smile. She didn't yet know that this promise would shake an entire powerful family to its core. A day after being expelled from Cross Manor, Maria sat by the window of a small weekly rented apartment in South Ash Grove. The place was barely 300 square feet old, paint peeling off the walls, the heater clanking rhythmically like a tired heart. Snow fell quietly outside, pale light filtering through the fogged glass. Beside the single bed lay an open suitcase, half unpacked. On the table, a cup of cold coffee and a folded newspaper. On the front page was a photo of Maria talking from behind as she left Cross Manor. The headline screamed, "Billionaire Family's Maid, suspected of stealing $5 million heirloom." Beneath it, a short paragraph quoted an inside source, claiming she had shown suspicious behavior toward family property and was unusually close to young Gabriel Cross. Maria didn't bother reading the rest. She folded the paper tightly, her fingers trembling not with anger, but with the effort of keeping her heart from breaking further. Her phone buzzed on the bedden unknown number. Maria hesitated, then answered. A calm, middle-aged man spoke on the other end. "Miss Reyes, this is Detective John Linwood from the Elmore County Police Department. We've received a formal report from Mr. Cross's legal counsel regarding the theft. Well, be in touch soon for an official statement." Mariah's voice was hoarse. "I didn't steal anything. That will be determined through the investigation. Please cooperate." The line went dead. Maria exhaled slowly. She couldn't afford a lawyer. She had no evidence, nothing but memories, and faith in one boy who still believed in her. In 6 years at Cross Manor, she had never imagined she'd leave this way. She thought of Gabriel riding his bike through the garden, the nights he burned with fever while she wiped his forehead with warm water. She had no children of her own, but she knew what it meant to worry, to love so fiercely that his nightmares became her own. Now, all of that was reduced to 2 words: the help. A title with no voice, no right to defend, no weight against a family with lawyers, media influence, and, worst of all, prejudice. Maria slipped on her old coat and stepped out to buy bread and milk from the corner store. On the street, she passed a group gathered around an outdoor screen showing the evening news. Evelyn Cross's image filled the display, poised, elegant, speaking to reporters. "We had no choice but to act according to policy," Evelyn said coolly. "Our family has suffered too many breaches of trust. We ask that justice be served impartially." Maria stopped in her tracks. Her chest tightened, not from Evelyn's words, but because of the figure standing silently behind her, Alexander, expressionless, exhausted. He said nothing, didn't deny, didn't defend. Maria turned away and walked faster, the cold slicing into her skin. One question pulsed in her mind, a question that had haunted her all night. Does he believe me? Upstairs at Cross Manor. Gabriel sat in his dimly lit room. The curtains were drawn, leaving only a sliver of daylight across the wooden desk where dozens of small electronic models lay half-finished. His old iPad glowed faintly open to the interface of a simple coding program he had written himself. But today, he wasn't coding. He was staring at a picture of Maria photo secretly taken 2 years ago, when she was washing his hair. He had hidden it ever since, like a private treasure. No one in this house made him feel safe the way she did. No one understood his silence, or waited patiently for him to finish a thought with nothing but a gentle smile. Gabriel knelt beside the wardrobe, lifted the carpet, and pried open a small wooden panel. Hidden beneath it was a hard drive, his secret backup of old security footage from the manor. He had learned how to copy the system files out of curiosity and his love for technology. He plugged it into his laptop, typing slowly, line by line. He hadn't told anyone, but he knew one thing for sure: Maria didn't take that necklace. Because when she was called upstairs that day, Gabriel had been playing hide-and-seek near the hallway leading to the vault, and he saw someone go in 15 minutes before Maria. That person was his grandmother, Evelyn. In his study, Alexander Cross turned a page of the report in front of him, though his eyes couldn't focus. His mind replayed the moment Maria had stood before him the day before, her eyes steady, not pleading, not angry. Just one unspoken question: why he had always seen himself as a fair man, someone who defended his staff against his mother's cutting judgments. But this time he had stayed silent. Silent out of fear of disappointing Evelyn, fear of scandal. Fear of the truth in his own heart, that he might be siding with someone far below his world of status and wealth. Alexander pressed his hand to his forehead. The shame burned deep, and he knew Gabriel had seen it too. When Maria returned to her apartment, a folded slip of paper was wedged under the door. A court summons. The preliminary hearing was set for next Thursday. No lawyer, no bail. Maria looked out the window. Snow still fell, soft and endless. Quietly, she folded the paper and placed it on the table. Then she sat down, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the ashen sky. She wasn't afraid of court. She was afraid of something far worse, that the one person she trusted had turned away. Yet, somewhere deep in her heart, she held on to a promise, a small, trembling voice that had whispered through the cold iron gate, "Maria, I'll bring you back. I promise." And it was that promise, fragile but bright, that kept her standing. No one in Cross Manor knew that Evelyn had a secret meeting 2 weeks earlier, just days before the necklace disappeared. It was a Tuesday afternoon, snow falling lightly under a heavy gray sky. Without informing the housekeeper, she left the estate in silence. Her driver, Mr. Harris, a discreet man, took her to an upscale cafe tucked inside Ashgrove's old quarter. Waiting for her there was a thin woman in a worn, wine-colored coat. Her blonde hair hung loose over her shoulders, her face pale and drawn, eyes sunken and uneasy. Her name was Rita Dawsona, former maid who had once worked for the Cross family years ago, until she was fired for stealing Mrs. Cross's wallet. Evelyn sat down without offering a handshake. "You need money? I need a witness." Rita swallowed hard, fingers nervously twisting together. "What do you want me to say? That she, Maria Reyes, snuck into the family vault? That she once expressed interest in the heirloom necklace? All you have to do is sign the statement. I'll handle the rest." Rita hesitated. "I don't even know her. From what I've heard, she's good at her job." Evelyn gave a cold smile. "No one cares about the truth, only that the story matches the accusation. You want to get out of that shabby apartment, don't you?" After a long silence, Rita nodded. A pen was passed across the table, and with a single signature, a lie began to take root. That same evening, Maria was tending to Gabriel as usual, unaware that Rita had been summoned to the manor to confirm details for the investigation. Rita, who had once visited the estate with the housekeeper's ex-boyfriend, was now the knife Evelyn drove quietly into Mariah's back. But Evelyn's motives had little to do with the missing necklace. She had been watching Maria for a long time. To her, the maid's closeness with Gabriel was dangerous, something that weakened Alexander. She believed Mariah's presence was the reason her grandson wasn't growing into the proper aristocrat she envisioned. Yet the real trigger came from something deeper, something that had burned in Evelyn's mind ever since a dinner party earlier that month. She had seen the look in her son's eyes when he glanced at Maria. It was not the look a man gives his employee. It was admiration, quiet recognition, a warmth she had never seen Alexander show, not even toward Gabriel's late mother. Evelyn had sacrificed too much to protect the family's reputation. She had once buried her husband's scandal, forced her daughter to end a pregnancy to avoid shame, dismissed employees for a single slip in front of reporters. She could not allow a nameless, degreeless woman of humble origin to infiltrate her family. Not her home, not her grandson's heart. And Maria, with her calm demeanor and eyes filled with compassion, was the thorn Evelyn could not pull out. A thorn that didn't draw blood, but pierced the pride she had spent a lifetime defending. Elsewhere in the city, Alexander Cross sat at his desk, a cup of coffee long gone cold. He reopened the footage from the vault, or tried to. As Evelyn had already told him, the system malfunctioned. The data's lost. Alexander wasn't the type to believe in coincidence, but this time he hadn't argued. His mind echoed with the words Gabriel had asked him a few nights earlier, when Alexander came to say good night. "Dad, do you think people can be hated just because they're not like everyone else?" Alexander frowned. "What do you mean?" Gabriel hesitated, then shook his head, hugging his stuffed bear. "Never mind. Just a few words, but they hit like a silent slap. Alexander took another sip of the bitter, cold coffee. Maybe he had closed his eyes for too long. That night, in her small rented room, Maria opened her notebook. Inside were simple notes, Gabriel's study schedule, his favorite jokes, the little paper cutouts he had secretly pasted on the back of her chair. One memory made her smile the time Gabriel filled her pillow with flour to make snow because he missed the last winter's snowfall. Her heart trembled not from fear of the coming trial, but from the feeling that something was still unfinished. She didn't want to clear her name for her own sake. She wanted to keep her promise to that boy who had believed in her that she would not disappear like everyone else had. And Maria didn't know that, at that very moment, in a quiet room on the second floor of Cross Manor, Gabriel was preparing something in secret, something that would change everything. On Monday morning, Maria put on her old moss-green sweater and wrapped herself in the knitted scarf Gabriel had given her last Christmas. The air was biting cold. She stepped out of her rented room, locked the door carefully, and joined the slow-moving crowd along Ash Grove's Main Street, heading toward the Elmore District Courthouse. Curious eyes followed her. Some pitied, some sneered, each glance a cold pin against her skin. To them, she was no longer the devoted caretaker of a lonely child. She was the maid accused of theft. Maria didn't react. She simply walked, slow and steady, back straight, eyes forward. She knew no one would walk beside her. No friends, no family, no lawyer, and, certainly, no apology from the Cross family. Inside the courthouse lobby, she waited among other summoned defendants. Across from her, an elderly man flipped through the morning paper. On the front page, the headline blared, "Trial opens today. In Cross family heirloom, theft maid faces criminal charges." Below, it was an image cut from security footage, not of her stealing, but of her smiling, carrying a tray of water. Maria stared at the photo without shaking her head. Sometimes, the truth doesn't need to be twisted, only placed in the wrong frame. When her name was called, Maria entered hearing room No. 4, where pale light poured through a tall window, falling directly onto the defendant's chair. She sat, hands resting on her knees, steady but cold. The small courtroom felt hollow. Only the judge, 2 clerks, and a young female attorney representing the plaintiff. Alexander was not there. Evelyn, of course, didn't have to attend. She was recovering from illness. Maria felt the emptiness press around her. It was like standing alone on a stage, bound and watched, while everyone else waited for the curtain to fall. The opposing attorney began, her voice flat and clinical. According to the data provided by the Cross family, the defendant accessed the estate's vault without authorization. Surveillance footage was disabled during the time in question. The defendant's fingerprints were found on the jewelry case. A witness, Miss Rita Dawson, formerly employed at the estate, testified that she saw the defendant near the vault at the time of the alleged theft. Maria raised her head. Her eyes were still, like a frozen lake. She said nothing, waiting for the judge's question. She still believed, faintly, that justice might listen. The judge, a silver-haired man in his 50s, looked directly at her. "Mrs. Reyes, do you have anything to declare?" Maria took a slow breath, her voice soft but steady. "I never touched that necklace. I was in the vault because the housekeeper asked me to find a storage box for the dinner event. I don't know why the cameras were off. I don't know why someone would lie. But I know clearly that I did nothing wrong. The clerk's keys clicked quietly. The room fell still. No one spoke in her defense. No one questioned the witness. After barely 10 minutes, the preliminary hearing ended. The next court date was set 2 weeks later. As Maria stepped into the hallway, a few onlookers had gathered. A young reporter held out a microphone. "Maria, do you have anything to say to the public? Are you truly innocent?" She looked at him as distant and walked past without a word. She passed 2 women whispering by the door. "Well, I'm not surprised," one said to the other. "Their kind is always tempted by money." Maria heard every word. She didn't turn around. Back in her small apartment, she sat at the narrow dining table and opened her old laptop, the one Gabriel had helped her set up for voice commands. She typed slowly, "Free Public Defense Lawyer, Vermont." There weren't many results. Most were overbooked or required documents she didn't have. She copied down a few numbers, then pulled a blank sheet of paper from her folder and began writing her own statement. Her handwriting slanted, careful, the same way she used to record Gabriel's daily care notes. As she wrote, memories crept in. She remembered the night Gabriel nearly suffocated from a peanut allergy at a dinner party, how she was the only one quick enough to grab the epinephrine and inject him properly. She remembered Alexander frozen in shock while the guests screamed. And she remembered how Evelyn never asked about her grandson afterward, only scolded the staff for not checking the dessert list. And now, those same people had joined together to erase her, as if she were nothing but dust on their marble floors. Mariah's gaze darkened, not with rage but with realization. This wasn't just about truth anymore. It would take courage. She rose, pulled the curtain aside, and looked out. Snow had begun to fall again, quiet, covering the rooftops in white. Maria closed her eyes, and once more saw Gabriel's face, his eyes, his small voice whispering through the cold, "Maria, he'll bring you back. I promise." That promise still lingered, and it was the only thing keeping her upright. Maria woke earlier than usual that morning. She brewed a cup of hot ginger tea knot for the cold outside, but to calm the knot twisting in her stomach, she dressed simply a crisp white blouse, a worn gray coat, no makeup, no heels, only quiet dignity and a heart ready to walk into a battle she knew she could not win. By dawn, the Elmore District Courthouse was already crowded. Cameras and tripods lined the steps. Reporters murmured into microphones while curious onlookers gathered like moths to the flame. A city bus stopped nearby, and a woman stepped down, plain, unremarkable, until someone gasped. It's her flashes erupted. Voices rose. Maria walked through them like through a storm of snow, steady, silent, her gaze fixed on the courthouse doors. Inside, she was escorted into courtroom No. 2A, larger, brighter space with 4 rows for the public and a section reserved for the press. At the plaintiff's table stood attorney Linda McCall, in a sleek black suit, hair pulled tight, eyes sharp as glass. Known in legal circles as the Fine Blade, McCall had built her career on cutting cases clean and fast. This wasn't a case to herit, was a performance to be managed. Neither Gabriel Cross nor Alexander appeared in court, but in the very back row sat a man in a thick coat and knit cap, head lowered. No one paid him attention. The judge entered. The court convenes today to hear testimony and review evidence in the matter of the state versus Maria Reyes, charged with theft of personal property. Attorney McCall began, her tone clinical. She spoke of irregular behaviors in Mariah's employment record, her unusual access to restricted areas, the coincidental timing of her presence in the vault, and the mysterious camera malfunction. Then she called the witness, Rita Dawson. Rita stepped up to the stand, neatly dressed, modest makeup, carefully brushed hair. Her eyes flickered briefly toward Maria before turning away. "Miss Dawson," McCall prompted, "did you see the defendant near the storage vault on the 14th of last month?" Rita nodded nervously. "Yes, I was visiting my ex-boyfriend, the butler, and I saw her walking toward the vault. She looked secretive. She seemed startled when she saw me. Did you hear her say anything? Not clearly. I only caught the word necklace." Mariah's fingers tightened on her lap. Her gaze lifted, steady, quiet, unflinching. She wasn't angry, only profoundly disappointed. She had once helped Rita find work after she'd been fired years ago, and now that same woman stood here, lined to save herself for a handful of coins. McCall turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, we have a witness and forensic evidence fingerprints on the jewelry case. Though surveillance video was lost due to technical failure, the chain of facts supports prosecution." The judge nodded gravely. Then he turned to Maria. "Mrs. Reyes, would you like to respond?" Maria rose, stepped slowly to the stand, and placed a hand over her heart. Her voice was soft, but it carried, "I did not steal. I have never entered any room without permission. I worked 6 years at Cross Manor without a single complaint. I cared for Gabriel as if he were my own child. I know I have no proof, but I have the truth, and I believe sooner or later the truth will find its voice." The courtroom went still, and then the heavy wooden door swung open. A boy in a gray sweater and red scarf stepped inside, clutching a worn iPad. Gasps rippled through the room. Gabriel Cross. He walked straight to the center aisle, unafraid. A security officer started forward, but the judge raised his hand. "Gabriel," he said, surprised. "Why are you here?" Gabriel took a deep breath, lifted the iPad high, and said, voice trembling but clear, "I have proof." The screen flickered to life. Footage appeared, grainy, but unmistakable. The corridor between Evelyn's study and the vault, the correct date, the correct time, and the only person entering the vault that day was Evelyn Cross herself. A stunned silence fell, then a wave of shocked murmurs. McCall's face went pale. The judge leaned forward. Where did this footage come from? Gabriel spoke, his tone steady. "I back up the old security cameras in case they fail. I noticed one file missing from the system, so I checked my copy. This is from my personal drive." Maria froze, caught between disbelief and tears. Gabriel walked to the evidence table, placed the iPad down carefully, and turned to her. Their eyes met. His small nod was simple, but it carried the weight of a promise kept. The judge called a recess to verify the new evidence. At the back of the courtroom, the man in the knit cap finally lowered his head and removed his glasses. Alexander Cross. His face was pale with realization, not at the footage, but at the fact that his own son had spoken truth when every adult in their world had chosen silence. And, for the first time in many weeks, Maria felt something stir inside her chest. Not relief, not victory, but the fragile warmth of not being alone anymore. That afternoon, after the court adjourned to review the video, Gabriel was taken to a small waiting room. He sat on a low wooden chair, his small hands clasped tightly, eyes fixed on the floor. He was only 9, but the little boy's face carried the stillness of someone much older. someone trying very hard not to tremble. A court officer asked him a few gentle questions. Gabriel only nodded, silent. Inside his head, all sounds seemed muffled. He kept replaying the night, 2 weeks ago, when he sneaked into the basement storage room and connected his old backup drive, when the screen lit up and showed Evelyn, his grandmother, entering the vault alone. His heart had pounded so loudly he thought the house could hear it. He had known, in that instant, that silence would destroy Maria, but speaking up could tear his family apart. For nights, Gabriel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, imagining Maria sitting alone in that small rented room, facing the world's hatred. He imagined her standing in court, accused of something she never did. He imagined her life if she were condemned. Each thought felt like a stone pressing on his chest. And then, one night, he asked himself, if I stay silent, am I any different from the people who turned away from her? He remembered the nights Maria held him through his nightmares, whispering until he drifted back to sleep. He remembered how she taught him to speak slowly, patiently, never laughing at his stutter. To Gabriel, Maria wasn't a servant. She was home, the only place in that cold mansion where warmth existed. Now, sitting in the waiting room, he pulled a small stuffed bear from his backpack. He'd brought it for courage. On its paw was a hand-stitched letter M. Maria had sewn it herself. He brushed his fingers over the thread and told himself quietly, I did the right thing. I have to keep doing it. Outside the room, chaos was building, within hours. Short video clips from the courtroom had hit social media the moment the boy walked in, holding up the iPad. Thousands of comments flooded in brave child, a boy with conscience. Maybe Mariah's innocent after all. A storm was forming this time, not against her, but for her. Meanwhile, in the parking lot behind the courthouse, Alexander sat alone in his car. He hadn't gone inside, but he couldn't bring himself to drive away either. He remembered the day he signed the order dismissing Maria. He'd told his mother then, I just want things to stay quiet. Now his son had shattered that quiet with one act of courage, and Alexander finally saw that the silence he'd clung to all these years wasn't peace. It was cowardice dressed as dignity. He picked up his phone to call his lawyer, then slowly lowered it again. Inside the courthouse, Maria was waiting. He pictured her eyes when she looked at Gabriel, shocked, tearful, proud. For the first time, Alexander understood his child had done what he himself hadn't had the strength to do. In the waiting room, Gabriel looked toward the window. The pale afternoon light streamed through the blinds, painting silver lines across his face. He took a deep breath and whispered, I'm not afraid anymore. A clerk opened the door. Are you ready to testify? Young man, Gabriel stood up, back straight. Yes, I'm ready. Out in the hallway. Maria stood waiting, her hands clasped before her. She didn't speak. She simply extended her hand. Gabriel reached for it. His fingers were small but firm, certain. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. Reporters swarmed at the end of the hall. One shouted, Gabriel, why did you do it? Weren't you scared? He didn't stop walking. He only said softly, because she didn't do anything wrong. And if I stayed quiet, that would be wrong too. The hallway fell into silence. Maria squeezed his hand, and a single tear slid down her cheek, not from despair, but from the fragile light of hope returning after a long winter. 2 days after the trial, The name Maria Reyes flooded every morning news outlet from television to radio. The sensational headlines slowly gave way to a new phrase: Maid Accused cleared by billionaire's son. A video clip showing young Gabriel walking into the courtroom, holding an iPad and firmly declaring, "I have evidence," had been shared millions of times across social media. A Tuesday morning broadcast on WNYM ran the headline, "The truth begins to surface. Maria may be the victim of a setup." Evening talk shows buzzed with debate. The public split into two camps: some sympathetic, the others skeptical, but no one was indifferent anymore. In a small cafe in Midtown, three elderly women sat close together by the window. "Did you see the news that kid's brave?" "Sure is." The boy had the guts to speak the truth. The father's the one hiding. People that rich don't understand what it's like for the rest of us. Gabriel didn't hear those words, but Maria did. A cafe owner had invited her in to get out of the rain. When the woman realized who she was, the woman from the Cross case, she smiled softly and said, "You've been treated unfairly for too long. I believe you." The words were gentle as spring rain, yet to Maria they felt like a blessing. Meanwhile, at Cross Manor, the house that had always been quiet now felt heavy with silence. Evelyn refused visitors, turned off her phone, and ignored reporters. Media crews camped outside the gates, waiting for anyone to speak. But Alexander had yet to appear. He sat in his third-floor study, a luxurious room overlooking snow-covered pines. On his desk lay Gabriel's old iPad, the screen dark. He replayed the same video again for the fourth time. The same scene: Evelyn entering the storage room. Eyes cautious, gloved hands moving deliberately. A brief act, but one powerful enough to turn an entire case on its head. Alexander didn't know what his mother had been doing there, but he knew one thing: she had enough power to twist wrong into right, and he had let it happen. He picked up his phone, opened his contacts, and searched for Maria Reyes. The screen read, "Number deleted." He remembered, no, we had erased it the night he signed her dismissal papers. A small act, but full of arrogance. Just then, Gabriel entered without knocking. His eyes met his father's directly. "Dad, have you talked to the press?" Alexander shook his head. "I'm thinking. People are saying terrible things about Maria. Some still think she's guilty. I know, but nothing's proven yet." Gabriel paused, then said quietly, "It's already clear to me." Alexander looked up. In that moment, he saw disappointment in his son's eyes. "I stood up for her," Gabriel said, "and you stayed silent." Then he turned and walked away. Alexander sank back into his chair. He had never felt so small. That evening, an investigative report on WQRV revealed a shocking new detail: Rita Dawson, the sole witness against Maria, had a past record of falsifying testimony in a 2017 labor dispute. The files had been buried, but a former employee, anonymously, had sent them to the news team. The internet exploded. The hashtag, #EarJusticeForMaria, surged to the top of trending lists. Countless posts analyzed, compared, and questioned the true motives behind the Cross family's actions. Maria read everything. She didn't share. She didn't respond to reporters, but inside her, a new wave was rising, a wave of justice, finally turning in her favor. That night, Gabriel entered his father's study and placed a note on the desk. Alexander looked down. It read, in his son's handwriting, "Tomorrow. If you don't speak, someone else will." He lifted his eyes and saw his son standing there, waiting. And in that instant, Alexander understood this was no longer just Mariah's fight. Night fell slowly over Cross Manor. Snow blanketed the stone pathway leading to the house that once symbolized the power and prestige of Ash Grove. From the second-floor window, a faint light spilled onto the white snow, flickering like a fragile breath. Inside the grand sitting room, once the site of lavish receptions. Evelyn Cross sat alone by the fireplace, holding a cup of herbal tea, staring silently into the red flames. Since the video's release, she had vanished from public view. Calls from media advisors, her private lawyer, and board members all went unanswered. She had given only one instruction: keep silent. But that very silence had turned into the sharpest cut of all from public opinion. Footsteps echoed behind her. Evelyn didn't turn. She knew that, sound measured, firm, yet calm. Alexander stood in the doorway. His face wasn't angry, but something in his eyes made the warm room feel suddenly cold. "Mother," he said, his voice low but steady, "we need to talk." Evelyn took a sip of tea without looking up. "If you've come to interrogate me, let the lawyers handle it. No, I just want the truth from you." For the first time, she set the cup down. The fire crackled softly. "What is it you want to hear?" "The necklace. Why did you go into the storage room, and why did you let Maria take the fall?" Evelyn remained silent for a long time. Then she rose and walked to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered garden. "You don't know what it took to hold this family together for 40 years. Alexander, when your father died, everything collapsed onto my shoulders. I had to stand firm against gossip, plunging stocks, and lawyers circling like vultures. I wasn't allowed mistakes, and I couldn't allow someone from outside our world to destroy that balance." Alexander stepped closer, his eyes fixed on her back. "Maria didn't destroy anything. She raised my son. She saved his life. She never touched a single cent of this house. But you chose to make her a scapegoat." Evelyn turned, and in her eyes flickered a deep, guarded pain. "You think I was afraid of her? No, I was afraid of what I saw in your eyes every time you looked at her. I was afraid Gabriel would grow to love her more than he loves his own grandmother. I was afraid that one day he'd call her family and not us." The room went utterly still. Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them, his voice quiet but firm. "So what if he did? Mother, if she deserves it." For the first time in her life, Evelyn faltered. The woman who had survived scandals and held an empire steady through recessions suddenly seemed fragile before that simple sentence. "I've already lost everything once. Alex," she whispered. "I can't bear to lose it again." Alexander stepped forward and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His voice was weary, not accusing. "You haven't lost anything, but you're turning love into fear, and you made an innocent woman pay for it." Evelyn didn't respond. She turned her face away. As Alexander walked toward the door, she murmured, so softly it was almost to herself, "I don't know how to love without control." The next morning, in the law offices of Cross and Lane, a sealed letter signed by Evelyn Cross arrived for the firm's legal team. In it, she admitted being present in the storage room on the day of the alleged theft only to check the inventory. She wrote and denied any intent to steal. However, she formally withdrew all charges against Maria Reyes and requested that the court dismiss the case entirely. The news spread instantly. Headlines erupted across major networks like CBS and NBC. Evelyn Cross admits presence at scene case takes dramatic turn. Maria received a call from a public defender newly assigned to represent her after the case drew national attention. His voice trembled slightly with relief. "Well, file for full dismissal. You might be completely exonerated." Maria was silent for a long time before she replied softly, "I don't need anyone to bow their heads. I just want my peace back." That evening, in the small room of her rented apartment, Gabriel sat beside her. He quietly handed her a folded piece of paper. "I wrote an essay for class," he said. "The topic was the person I admire most." Maria unfolded it. The handwriting was clumsy but sincere. "The person I admire most is Miss Maria. She doesn't have a superhero cape, but she's always there when I need her. I hope one day the world will see her the way I do." Maria smiled through tears. They fell onto the paper, but this time they were warm. A week after Evelyn Cross withdrew all charges, the atmosphere at Cross Manor shifted. No more reporters camped outside the iron gates, no more calls from anxious media advisors. The silence that lingered now wasn't shelter, it was a waiting space before something irreversible. In the grand library, Alexander sat alone. The red carpet under his feet had dulled with age. Bookshelves stretched to the ceiling, coated in dust. On the desk before him sat a framed letter Maria's handwriting, preserved behind glass. He had found it after the trial. It was a letter she left behind before leaving the manor, only a few short lines, with no bitterness, no accusation. "Thank you for allowing me the chance to care for Gabriel. I don't know how much I've done right, but I know one thing: I loved that boy as if he were my own." Alexander had read those lines countless times, but this morning, for the first time, he truly understood them. For 7 nights, he hadn't slept through once, not because of fear or reputation, but because of one haunting question. After all this, what do I really want to hold on to, my name or the truth? That morning, he walked into the main boardroom of Cross and Lane, the empire he had led for 4 years. Under the pale lights, executives and shareholders awaited his statement. Alexander stood tall, calm. "I have a decision to announce," he said. "I am stepping down as chairman, effective immediately. He'll be taking an indefinite leave from all executive duties." A murmur rippled through the room. One man protested, "Mr. Cross, this will shake investor confidence. It'll affect the market." The press. "What are you doing?" Alexander's tone didn't waver. "I'm doing what I should have done from the start, taking responsibility. Not just as a businessman, but as a father and as a man." Another voice, hesitant, "Who will replace you in the interim?" "I've contacted the supervisory board to appoint an independent member." "And one more thing." He paused briefly, eyes steady. "Well, be founding the Gabriel Funda nonprofit that protects domestic workers and employees in family-run enterprises." The room fell silent. Alexander ended the meeting with a simple line, "I haven't lost everything. I'm just starting over from what's right." That afternoon, he drove alone to the modest housing complex on the city's west side, where Maria and Gabriel had been staying. No chauffeur, no bodyguards, just a man carrying a long overdue apology. Maria was watering plants in the small yard pots of lavender and basil lined the fence. She wore a soft blue sweater, earth still clinging to her hands. When she saw him, she paused, silent. Alexander stopped a few paces away. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not turning your back on Gabriel. Or on me, even when I didn't deserve it." Maria lowered her gaze. "I didn't do it for you," she said gently. "I did it for a child who needed protection." "I know." Alexander replied, meeting her eyes. "And if I'm here today, it isn't to ask for redemption. It's because without honesty, there's nothing worth holding on to." The wind carried the scent of wet soil between them. Silence stretched, not uncomfortable, just honest. Finally, he asked, "Can you forgive me?" Maria looked at him. Her gaze wasn't cold anymore, but it wasn't yielding either. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting," she said softly. "It means I no longer let the wound define me." He nodded slowly, accepting her words. Then he turned and walked away, feeling lighter than he had in years. That evening, in their small living room, Gabriel placed a card on the table. "It's from my dad," he said. "He says he's taking a break from work. I don't really understand everything, but I think he's trying to be better." Maria opened the card. Alexander's handwriting, neat, deliberate, unguarded, read, "Thank you for keeping safe the one thing I almost lost. If you ever need anything, I'm here." Maria folded the card and placed it inside a wooden box next to the keepsakes Gabriel had made for her. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew this thing's once thought unchangeable could begin again, from the courage of a child, from the surrender of a woman who once controlled the world, and from the quiet, hard choice of a man torn between power and conscience who finally chose responsibility. Spring arrived late in Ash Grove, but in the small garden behind Mariah's rented house. New shoots had begun to sprout from the old soil. Maria was bent over trimming a lavender bush when Gabriel ran out, waving a bundle of papers. "Miss Maria, I finished it. My end-of-term essay." He handed it to her, eyes shining with pride. Maria took the papers and skimmed them. Between the uneven lines of a child's handwriting was her portrait through his eyes, a kind, patient woman, braver than any superhero. She didn't laugh, didn't cry. She simply folded the paper and drew the boy into her arms, deep inside her chest. Something warm flickered like a sliver of sunlight breaking through long, settled fog. She didn't need titles or recognition anymore. She had been seen by the one who mattered most. Alexander kept his promise. After resigning from his position, he devoted most of his time to the Gabriel Fund, working with NGOs, labor lawyers, and advocates for domestic workers, single mothers, and others whose voices were often unheard. One late afternoon, he knocked on Mariah's door. He carried nothing but a worn-out book and a few folders. "May I sit for a moment?" Maria nodded. They sat outside under the porch, where the fading sunlight painted the dark wood planks in shades of gold. Gabriel was drawn on the floor, glancing up at them now and then before returning to his picture. Alexander placed the book on the table, an old children's story. On the cover was a small bird learning to fly. Beneath the title, "The Keeper of the Wind." "I found it while cleaning Gabriel's room," he said. "You used to read it to him, didn't you?" Maria nodded, lips curved in a quiet smile. "He always said I was the keeper of the wind, the one who keeps his dreams from drifting away." Alexander said nothing. After a while, he slid the folders toward her. "I wanted to ask if you'd consider joining the Gabriel Fund as a community coordinator. You'd visit affected families, assess their situations, and connect them with legal aid." Maria blinked in surprise. "You really think I can do that?" "No one is better suited," he said, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Not just because of what you've been through, but because you understand silence, and you know how to make it speak. They didn't sign any papers that day." Maria asked for time to think. A week later, she accepted not for a title, but because she wanted others like her, people once forgotten, to know someone was listening a year later in the Ash Grove Elementary Auditorium. Gabriel stood on stage holding a certificate for excellence in writing. He leaned toward the microphone, his voice small but steady. Thank you to my dad for starting over. Thank you to Miss Maria for never giving up. I learned that sometimes you can't make others choose what's right, but if you choose right first, others might find the courage to follow. Applause filled the hall. Alexander looked at Maria. Their eyes met. No tears, no need for words. They had both walked through darkness, guided only by kindness, courage, and the silence that finally learned to break itself. That evening, at a small diner where Maria and Gabriel often had dinner on weekends, a middle-aged woman with warm brown skin approached their table, clutching a fabric bag. "Are you Miss Maria Reyes?" Maria nodded. The woman opened her bag and pulled out an envelope. "I received help from the Gabriel Fund last month. My kids got legal counseling. They won't be expelled anymore. I just wanted to say thank you." Maria accepted it with a gentle nod. Gabriel looked up at her, grinning. "You're not just keeping the wind for me anymore. You're keeping it for everyone." That night, in the quiet of her little home, Maria wrote in her journal today, "I realized I no longer need to prove anything. I don't need to live to be accepted. I just need to live to protect what's right. And if I can do it, anyone can." She set the pen down and glanced out the window, where the street lights cast soft gold halos against the glass. Across the city, in another warm house. Light spilled through a large window where Alexander and Evelyn sat together at dinner for the first time in almost a year, silent, but without tension. Each had learned how to move forward not by forgetting the past, but by refusing to let it imprison the future. In a world of endless complications, the simplest thing remains the hardest: to keep kindness. And in a small house, beneath a quiet porch, with a woman, a boy, and a wooden table worn smooth by time that kindness lived on, soft, steadfast, and warm like a new bud in early spring. In our fast-paced, modern world, we often forget that the smallest, simplest things, those that seem insignificant, can create the moments that touch our hearts the deepest. The story of Maddie, the quiet waitress, isn't just a modern-day fairy tale. It's a gentle yet powerful reminder that kindness is never wasted. Though carrying the wounds of her past, Maddie chose neither bitterness nor self-pity. She chose to live quietly, but always let her heart lead the way. And it was through one subtle, acting sign language to speak to an elderly deaf mother that a miraculous door opened, transforming not only her life, but also healing hearts that had long been frozen. The lesson here is simple, but not easy. We don't need power, money, or fame to do something extraordinary. Sometimes, all it takes is to truly listen and to look at others with empathy. In that moment, you're already doing what the world needs most. If you've walked through life's ups and downs, you'll understand the most precious things aren't what we gain, but what we give. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If it touched your heart or stirred something within you, please like, share, and subscribe so we can continue spreading stories that remind us of our shared humanity. We truly value every moment you've spent listening.